皆様お待たせ。
Thank you very much for waiting. We would now to move on with the next part of the program. Session 3, discussion session, New Energy Vision and Japan's Dawn. So we would have from Japan Renewable Energy Foundation Executive Board Chair, Mr. Thomas Cavalier, to moderate the session. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. On stage, you see 4 male professors of respectable age, 2 of which are born in Japan, 2 who are not, 2 who have been here all day, 2 who have just arrived, 1 professor of medical science, 1 biologist, 1 economist, and 1 physicist. And our task is to discuss an energy vision for Japan and the dawn of a new development here. 3 of us know the plan for this session. The 4th one, who just arrived, Professor Yino, does not know what we have planned, but we will show. The plan is that Professor Kurokawa will start describing why we are here. Professor Suzuki will talk on a vision, and then Professor Yino will get the final introductory opportunity, and then we hope that we will have approximately half of this final hour to actually discuss with each other, and maybe even an opportunity for people to intervene from the floor. So first, I give the floor to Professor Kurokawa to describe why are we here.
What is the title? このタイトルは素晴らしいと思うんだけど、失敗から学ばない人たちは
I think this is a great title, but what I can say is that people who do not learn from mistakes, they will repeat the same thing over and over. And so could you show the first slide, please? So it means unless you look back on the past, you won't be able to go forward. And Churchill, as Churchill said, if you still if you convene with people who have not learned from history, then there is not going to be able to do anything. So if we haven't learned from Fukushima, then we won't be able to do or realize anything. Now, Fukushima had been a major accident, and so there should be a lot being discussed. There have been many books published, and many academics have not really spoken about this issue up to now. And so the first question is what is or why, and the second is we have an English version of these videos. Our report is about 600 pages long, so no one would be willing to read that. Even the digest version was not be read because what I'm writing or what we have written is about inconvenient truth. And so how many journalists, how many of them have actually written about this or reported on this? And so it was the first time ever that we have had a first time or independent commission, investigation commission, which had been formulated in Japan to look into the accident. And so we say that it is the division of powers among the administration. So you who feel that maybe we have not had this opportunity in the past of having her work in such an independent commission. And so we have 6 videos, and so looking at those 6 will allow you to understand all.
The accident was caused by the unexpected magnitude of the tsunami. It blamed the accident entirely on the tsunami and claimed it was unaware of the risks. The company called the accident a natural disaster or an act of God. But was it really? Whether the tsunami was the only cause is far from certain. No one can say for sure that the earthquake didn't play a part in the accident. The plant's 6 reactors needed upgrades worth $800 million to boost their earthquake resistance, but nothing was done for reactors 1 to 3. And the tremor that hit the region on that day was stronger than the projections for the upgrades. Didn't TEPCO know the nuclear plant was at risk? When the first reactor was built in 1974, the risk of a major earthquake or tsunami hitting the region was believed to be low. But later surveys showed that Fukushima was not safe. Why did TEPCO and nuclear regulators fail to adopt sufficient safety measures? Both the company and the regulators were convinced nuclear plants were safe and fail-proof. They believed 3 safety systems, shutdown, cooling, and containment, would be enough to deal with any emergency. They also gave priority to keeping the reactors running over ensuring their safety. Global standards call for 2 additional safety measures, preventing radioactive leaks and protecting local residents. But TEPCO and the regulators simply assumed an accident would never occur and ignored the measures. They had plenty of time to take action long before the earthquake and tsunami, yet they postponed anti-earthquake upgrades from 2009 to 2016. By 2006, they knew a large tsunami could cause a serious accident, but they failed to act. Contrary to other countries and international organizations, Japan was putting off safety measures. TEPCO has since admitted that in retrospect, the nuclear plant was not well guarded against accidents. In other words, the Fukushima crisis could have been averted if proper measures had been implemented. So it's reasonable to say the disaster was man-made.
というようなことがあって、私
And so, as you can see here from my handouts, please look at these videos. These are 3-minute-long videos, just 6 of them, and so they're very easy here to understand. And I think you could read this or understand this in Japanese or English, so retweet them. And I understand that they're working on this to create a Chinese version, Russian version, etc. And everybody knows what happened there. And there have been independent think tanks, journalists, politicians, administrators. They have been working on this. But the public servants, now we talk about public servants, but have anyone from the media ever written any article on that in the past several years? I'm sure not. And so we have spoken about the separation of powers. Now, the NIIC or the Investigation Commission has a website. It's called NAIC, N-A-I-I-C, and so you can listen to the deliberations there because there have been translations in both English and Japanese. National Academy has worked out a investigation. This had been a 2-year-long commission that was conducted, and I understand the report will be issued in May or June. And so we mentioned the separation of the 3 powers of democracy, and that's something that we need to do. Now, have we really acted our parts in this? Now, a professor from MIT has studied the Japanese politics from MIT, and then he has said that since the Fukushima accident, he has not observed any change in Japan. And many have said the same. So what sort of an accident do we need in order for us to go through some changes? And everybody is feeling that maybe we need to go through something of the magnitude of the Pacific War or the Second World War in order for us to make any changes to what we're doing. And that's because the lacking of accountability. Now, there has been a translation into Japanese of accountability, and I can say it's not translated properly into Japanese. So you have duties. If you're a president of a company or executive of a company, you have those duties which are designated to you, and you have to execute on those responsibilities, and that's what we mean by accountability. And so if you're a president of a company, you can't consult anyone. You have that responsibility to make that decision and take the responsibility. And so I know you see that in companies very often. If a company does something wrong, you see them on television, 3 of them lined up and bowing and saying they apologize. But is that a way of taking responsibility? That's not something that you need to consult with someone else to see if you want to take responsibility. You have to be the one responsible. And we are the 3rd largest economic power in the world, and we have created trust or confidence in Japan through the advances in the science and technologies. And so you have to be prepared to take responsibility. And so it said that it was the first ever such independent investigation commission that had been created. But what the commission had done was to do a whole body CT scan or CAT scan of Japan. So all of you need to go and exercise your voting rights or privileges. Now, it doesn't mean that there are always very good candidates for you to vote for, but you have to exercise your rights to take part in elections. 2 years ago, there was an election to the upper house of the parliament, and only 7.9% in their 20s had voted, and even in the age group in the 30s and 40s, that had been a very small percentage. And so of the young people in the 20s, the voting percentage or people who went to vote was very low. And so it's time where we have to take action by thinking for ourselves.
Thank you very much. I think you did well in explaining why we are here. And lessons should be learned from the nuclear accident in designing a future energy policy and energy system for Japan. And we've heard throughout the day of experiences from other parts of the world where the electricity market is made competitive, unbundled grid and supply, new renewable energy technologies having become cheap and compete with the established power industry, resulting in many of the old-fashioned power companies losing a lot of money in North America and Europe, but new modern technologies coming, resulting in low prices for consumers and significantly reduced environmental costs and risks. These should be opportunities for Japan as well, and I'd give the floor to Professor Suzuki to say a few words on what could be the visions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and honored to have the opportunity to share a few ideas with you. This conference has certainly, for me, been an uplifting, inspiring event to inform us about the enormous changes that are now taking place in the area of renewable energy around the world. I agree with Dr. Kurokawa that if we're going to understand Japan's position right now, that we have to look at history to see how we got to this place. And I'd like to set a larger context, much bigger than just Fukushima or even the energy issue itself, to look at how we got here. Yesterday, I saw an article by the Malaysian ambassador to Japan in Japan News, and the headline was, "A New Vision to Ensure Future Prosperity." And I thought, wow, we need that. But as I read it, it sounded just like the same old vision. trade agreements, tourism opportunities, and continued economic growth. The problem for me is that I seem to have a different notion of what prosperity means. The economy surely is a means to something else. It's not the goal. It's a means to achieving genuine prosperity. The economy itself is to help us reach that. Surely prosperity is defined by how well people are living. How is their health and medical care? Are they educated? Do they enjoy strong families and communities? In a world increasingly focused on consumption and buying new stuff, we seem to ignore what life is really all about. And I fear in our debates about nukes or no nukes, about climate change and so on, we're not facing up to the real reality of the nature of the global crisis that we are in. You see, we are living in a time without precedent in the 3.8 billion years that life has existed on this planet. The author Elizabeth Kolbert's newest book, The Sixth Extinction, documents the 5 past episodes of mass extinction of species that we find in the fossil record, and that we today are living in the 6th mass extinction, which, unlike other episodes, is not caused by natural events, but is being caused by us. As a top predator on the planet, we are the most vulnerable species to the consequences of this extinction crisis. For example, if all of the pollinators on the planet, like bees, disappear, terrestrial ecosystems around the world will collapse. Do we really think that we could survive such a catastrophe? Our species has very suddenly changed in our relationship with the planet. I was born in 1936 when there were only 2 billion people in the world. In my lifetime, the population has more than tripled. We are now the most numerous vertebrate species on the planet, and every one of the 7 billion of us needs to breathe air, drink water, eat, clothe, and shelter ourselves. That gives us a very large ecological footprint. It takes a lot of air, land, and water to keep us alive. But of course, we've now been suddenly given an enormous amount of technology. Technology that enables us to look at every part of the planet, to exploit to the bottom of the ocean, to the tops of mountains, to look for resources and take from the earth. And we've been afflicted with an enormous appetite for stuff, for consumption. You just come to Japan and you know how we love to buy stuff. Omiyage is at the heart of what your culture is all about. But that all comes from the earth. And when we're finished with it, it goes back into the earth. And we have a global economy now that regards the entire planet as a source of raw materials and the entire population as a market to sell our goods to. And that ignores local economies, local ecosystems, and local communities. We have become so powerful that we are now altering the properties of the biosphere itself. Physically, we form great dams, adding huge burdens of weight onto the planet and increasing the frequency of earthquakes. We are removing entire mountaintops to get at the coal beneath. We are opening mines, vast pits into the earth. We build cities, and we are changing the physical properties of the earth. Chemically, we are using the planet as a garbage can for our toxic chemicals. We've changed the chemistry of the atmosphere that is now changing the pH of the oceans itself. And biologically, we are spreading alien species around the world. We are clear-cutting forests, flooding entire ecosystems with dams, covering over the land with cities and so on. And that is why scientists today refer to this as the Anthropocene epoch, a period in geological time when human beings have become a geological force. But at the very moment when it is critical to see the problems we are creating in the context of living within the biosphere, we have become blind to be able to see the impact of what we are doing. You see, for 95% of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We had to follow plants and animals through the seasons, and they led us all over our territory. And when you are a hunter-gatherer, you know we are a part of nature and dependent on nature for our well-being and survival. In the last 10,000 years, we went through the agricultural revolution and became farmers. In 1900, when there were 1.6 billion people in the world, there were only 14 cities with more than 1 million people. London was the largest. Tokyo was the 7th largest city with 1.5 million people. That was the 7th largest city in the world. Most people lived in rural village communities because most of us were farmers. And farmers know that we are dependent and utterly embedded in the natural world. But suddenly that has changed. In only 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, we increased to 6 billion people. But now there were more than 400 cities with more than 1 million people. The 10 largest all had more than 11 million people. Most people in the rich countries like Japan and Canada and the United States and Europe live now in big cities. And in a big city, our highest priority becomes our job. We need a job to earn the money to buy the things that we want. You know, when I was a boy growing up, my mother and father lived through the Great Depression, and that affected the way they saw the world. And they taught us, you have to work hard to make money, to buy the things you need, the necessities in life. But today, we need money to buy the things we want, and there's no limit to what we want. We have become consumers. And so today we no longer ask, what is an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? Are we happier with all this stuff? We don't ask those questions because the economy has now become our highest priority. In the environmental battles that I've been involved with, I find that often the people we are fighting are not talking to each other. We're just screaming at each other. I did a 2-hour special program on forestry many years ago, and I interviewed these 3 loggers. And they were swearing at me and saying, people like you are taking our jobs away. And I said, listen, I don't know any environmentalist who's against logging. We want to be sure that your children and grandchildren can log forests like the ones you're cutting down now. And right away, one of the loggers said, no way my kids are going to become loggers. There aren't going to be any trees left. So the loggers were concerned about putting food on the table every week, about paying for their car and their mortgage on their house. Whereas environmentalists are talking about sustainability and long-term health of the forest. We, in these battles, are not even talking the same language. And so how much time do I have, Thomas?
Another 5 minutes.
Oh, good. So I think I would like to set a common language then, and a way of seeing the world that we can all agree on before we carry on our continued discussion. We live in a world that is shaped by the laws of nature. And we don't object to that. There's nothing we can do about it. In physics, we know that you can't build a rocket that will travel faster than the speed of light. We know that the laws of gravity means you can't build an anti-gravity machine on Earth. We know that the first and second laws of thermodynamics mean you can't build a perpetual motion machine. We understand that. Those are dictated to us by physics, and we live with that. In chemistry, there are rules and laws governing the diffusion rates of atoms or elements, the reaction constants. We know that the atomic properties of different elements means there are limits on what molecules we can synthesize We know that. That's chemistry, and we live with that. And in biology, it's the same. We know that every species has a maximum population that can be achieved in the carrying capacity of their habitat or their ecosystem. Beyond that, it is not sustainable. Humans are not limited to specific ecosystems. The biosphere is our home, but there is a carrying capacity within that biosphere. And we know that we are far beyond the sustainable carrying capacity of a human population. We are biological creatures. We're animals. And in Canada, when I tell people we're animals, they get mad at me. Don't call me an animal, I'm a human being. As if somehow we have transcended our biological biological structures. But I tell people, look, as animals, it means that our most fundamental need is dictated to us. How many of us could hold our breath for 5 minutes and not take a breath? We can't. Our bodies would not allow us to commit suicide by holding our breath. Air surely is the most critical need that we have, and clean air is critical for our health and well-being. Shouldn't we all agree our biological need for clean air should be the highest priority in the way that we live? And I can go through our biological needs. We need clean air, clean water, clean soil that gives us our food, clean energy, and biodiversity to give us these fundamental needs. Those are dictated realities of the laws of biology. Other things are not forces of nature. We draw borders around our property, around our cities, around our states and countries. And boy, do we take those lines seriously. In Texas, you can kill somebody who walks onto your property. We take those borders seriously, but nature, do you think air stops at borders because it's Japanese air or Canadian air? Do we think water stops flowing when it reaches a boundary, or that animals or plants don't move beyond human? They don't. They don't care about human borders. And yet when you go to an international conference on the future of the atmosphere, as we had in Copenhagen a few years ago to deal with the post-Kyoto Agreement, we had 192 countries trying to deal with the atmosphere that doesn't belong to anyone through the political agendas of 192 national boundaries. This is crazy. Nature doesn't care about human borders. And then we create things like capitalism, corporations, the economy, markets. These are not forces of nature, for heaven's sakes. We invented them. We can't change nature. We can't shoehorn, try to force nature to fit our creations. Let me just conclude by saying, not long ago, people believed in dragons and monsters and demons. I mean, they really believed in them. And we sacrificed, we made sacrifices. We gave them gold and jewels if we thought they were mad at us because we didn't want them to cause us harm. We believed it. Well, nobody believes in dragons or demons or monsters today because we know that we invented them in our minds. And yet what did we do? We substituted for dragons and demons another human invention called the economy or the market. And even some of the people here today talk of the market. The market, yes, oh, the market. Let the market do its thing. What the heck is going on? We created it. And if something's not working, we can change those things. But we can't change the laws of nature that we have to live with. So I think as we deliberate and worry and concern ourselves about the future of our species on Earth, that we have to understand those things that we can't do anything about, that we have to live within. And those things, primarily human-created constructs, that we can change to allow us to live long-term, sustainable, happy lives. This is the challenge we face today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we learned why we're here, and David has made us aware that we should question where we're going and that there are differences between the fundamental laws of nature and the human constructed limitations that sometimes limit our thinking more than it should. Now, Professor Yino, the opportunities of providing energy for Japan in a way that will fit with the laws of nature and the economic conditions of Japan. What do you have to say to us? Just talk into it. Just talk. Just talk.
There's something I'd like to say at the beginning. My retina is actually the decoupling from my eyes retina. Normally, when you are 20 years old, progression starts. My optic, the symptoms did not change, did not to actually stop. It just kept going worse and worse. So eventually I would lose my sight. Everything looks very hazy at the moment because of my very weak vision. And another thing I would like to say is that I'm not an expert in energy. So what I can say is just one thing. Having a myopic view, and if you pursue near future profits, the only thing that awaits you is the hell or the darkness, if you're myopic. I am a specialist in finance studies, so I cannot really give you an expert view on energy policies. But perhaps indirectly, I can say the following. Regarding my finance studies, at the end of 19th century, it was given birth in Germany. The mainstream, the neoclassical economics, when it was given its birth, my financial studies also saw its birth. Regarding the market society, there is the economic system that's operated in the market, and perhaps I should call this community, the place of your life, the social system and the political system, the governing system and the people who are governed. So there are three. So in the public finance, this is how we grasp. There are three elements. This is the state, market, community. So you could perhaps describe it in these three words. And compared with the neoclassical economics, they stop time and they use this cycle to describe the social phenomena. But in our public finance studies, we look at the process, how things have evolved. Professor Kurokawa and Dr. Suzuki, you mentioned it already. History is very important. Now, concerning the Japanese energy policies, as I look at them, and in 1973, the oil shock served as a kind of a transition point, not just for Japan, but for all of the world. Until then, in developed, industrialized countries, there was a time called Golden 30 years. Heavy industrialization was pursued, and then economic growth was also pursued as a result of the heavy industrialization. In terms of the social system, welfare state was the system. And economic growth and redistribution could go hand in hand. So based on that understanding, things were driven. So what supported this? By heavy industrialization, there was economic growth, and that supported this. But regarding the heavy industrialization, they use enormous amount of natural resources. And this oil shock told us that now there is a depletion, there is this warning that there is a looming depletion of natural resources, because 1 year before 1973, in 1972, the Club of Rome gave the warning, the limits to growth. Regarding this warning, the limits to growth, and non-renewables such as fossil fuel, which are non-renewables, and non-renewable resources will be depleted, and there will be the limitation to growth. And it was that kind of a warning about the looming depletion of non-renewables. So there was a looming critical situation, how people overcame this. President Carter of the United States, on top of White House, they installed solar panels. And by installing solar panels, we are no longer in the fossil fuel era. We are in the renewable age era. And that was a declaration made by President Carter. And President Reagan actually removed the solar panels. And he said, it is not the fossil fuel era, but it is not the era of renewables. Leave it to market. Market by price adjustment. Market will surely find alternative energy. In other words, if one price goes up, then the other things, they will also become available because of the cost of competition, and it will become available. And then nuclear power generation gain momentum. I was a student at the time. My mentor kept saying this to me, in this very narrow Japan, operation management would probably be okay, but the stock management, when the stock lifetime is actually has ended, how are you going to disassemble? And without that understanding, creating 10 nuclear units would be unthinkable. But then, people actually they ended up having 50 units. So by leaving things to the market and trying to enjoy economic growth, and those measures were taken one after another. So what actually happened as a result of this kind of a policy or measures? Then non-renewables, even going beyond the depletion of non-renewables, even renewable resources are now becoming non-renewable. Even renewables are not renewable anymore, because nature inherently has renewability, but this natural renewability is now beginning to get lost in the Greek philosophy regarding the elements, that soil and water and air, and also trees, and also fire. These renewables, renewable resources are now losing its renewability. So what did people start saying? Instead of limits to growth, sustainability. People started talking about sustainability. So this is our understanding of recognition. But while we say sustainability, some people still think that this is the sustainability of growth, but it is not what we are talking about here. We should be mindful of this, in particular looking at Japan, not just limited to energy policies, but for us to think about various policies. We are hugely responsible. We are accountable. Looking at the history of Japan or history of people, no, it's not just limited to such trivial things. It is about this blue planet which gave us the lives. It might actually bring us the end of the history of the blue planet. It's like at the cosmic history, we might have failed so badly that we might be actually bringing closer the demise of this blue planet. The renewability of nature is beginning to get lost. And I'm running out of time, so I may be skipping the detail. But on the back side, the society's renewable capability might be getting lost in this era. The Pope, when the human's history is faced in crisis, Rem Novum, something new. 1991, John Pope II published Rem Novum. Then the Pope, the Holy See, talked about two crises. One is a crisis in the natural environment. As I said before, the renewability is getting lost. There's another one, the human inviolability, human-to-human bond, human-to-human relations. Even those human-to-human relationships are faced with the risk of destruction. But humans are not even aware of that looming crisis. And that was the warning given by the Pope. Japanese. We experienced March 3/11, the greatest Japan earthquake. Life and death. We felt strong bond, kinship, looking at life and death. We must have learned at least two things. First, the value system of human society, what things are for. The value system in the human society on the very top. There must be the lives of the people that is at the top of the set of values. There's another thing. For people to live, you can live only by coexistence, only by symbiosis. So what does this mean? There are two dimensions. One, human to human, symbiosis between human to human, or coexistence of human to human. The other thing is that between nature, living things, and people, again, you have to coexist. Otherwise, humans simply cannot survive, simply cannot exist. And this must be communicated to the world over. As Professor Kurokawa mentioned, Japanese people get hot very easily, but get cold very easily too. And we love great stories, high-sounding stories. So when something great happens, we just have this misunderstanding, a misperception that nothing tragic is happening on the ground. One time, voluntarily, without any coercion, these two things were something that dawned on the people without being forced to address them. But Japanese people need to look at these things, and for looking at the energy policies based on these two kinds of experience, as Dr. Suzuki mentioned, the society of people. It should be on the rhythm of the living things, of the living creatures. Perhaps I should really stop, because those people who really did put economy at the market at first. You remember Harding, Commons, the tragedy of Commons. Now, tragedy of Commons, it's not really about the tragedy of a common area. People's commons. On the community, it's the tragedy because of the non-existence of the community. Because if there's community, the community can manage nature appropriately and dexterously. So from community. Regarding the face of nature, well, in German studies, nature differs from place to place. So you have to live amicably with nature. And this could imply that depending on the region, your lifestyles are different. And then you must live a life that is really befitting that particular area, the community and people. Then you need to have this kind of a metabolism. And for this to happen, there must be a community between people, amongst the people. And the limits of that the community must be actually supplemented by municipalities. What municipalities cannot do, then the higher government must handle at the same time. There must be the economic activities. This is really the people and materials metabolism. And because this is really about changing the materials to things that people can use. And then one must create that kind of economy from locality. And Japanese people have a mission. And the same holds true for the energy. First, energy should start with the locality. That's how I feel about this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what you just said was more relevant than some may have understood. You connected to what David Suzuki said about the market being constructed and gave examples where people referring to the market, in fact, was referring to one of many possible designs of the market. The point you made that while only renewable energy can be sustainable, renewable energy use is not necessarily done in a sustainable way, so we need to be careful. But maybe the most important thing was what you said about the role of the community. We have had a market designed for large-scale centralized electricity production with nuclear reactors and large coal-fired power stations. New technologies makes it possible to develop renewable energy in local decentralized systems. And we've heard earlier this morning or earlier today from Denmark how they have managed to achieve almost 50% renewable electricity, about 30% by wind power alone, by local municipalities and groups of individuals investing and developing those sources of electricity. But that has only been possible because of these people also exerting democratic influence, changing the legislation of the electricity market. And the kind of changes that we've seen in Denmark, in Europe, and also in America in recent years have not got any influence over the development in Japan. The legislation here still allows the electric power companies to be vertically integrated and exclude new renewable electricity generators from getting access to the market via the grid. Why is that? Professor Kurokawa, you can explain, can't you?
Well, I guess it's written and everybody knows, because after 9/11, so many publications, and good one and bad one, and also electricity monopolizing distribution and production, that always come to monopoly always become rotten. And you know that, 原価投下組織、それで 3% 利益、なんで
And 3% profit. Why is it that they're doing it? And also, they are golden parachuting, and also they know that procurement costs were high. Nobody talked about it, but they knew that a lot of things were happening. It would be necessary for people to understand, and I think media should play a bigger role. And also, we have the press society, and also in Japan, it seems that we tend to see only bureaucrats and also businessmen. We need to see independent professionals who can voice their views. If we look back at the Fukushima accident, the world is showing interest. People are showing concern. And 440 plants, nuclear power plants, are present. There are 70 being built. And if something happens, people want to learn from Japan what happened, actually. And do you think that they'll get an answer if they asked? And in 2004, in December, the Aceh tsunami took place, and there was a movement of the large plates. And same thing in Fukushima as well. And after the Aceh tsunami, in several months' time, the following month, in March or April, 8.6 magnitude level of earthquake took place. In 2002, there was 8.3 magnitude. This was in 2012. So you need to look 10 years ahead, 20 years ahead. What would you do? Because we are prone to earthquakes, and magnitude 5+ of earthquakes are taking place in the periphery of Japan, we also always need to be alert and also spend fuel. If it's leaked, what would happen? So people, do they think that that will not happen? Do people talk about what if? And also, what would happen? Are you distributing iodine? And are they saying that that was out of expectations? What are you all thinking about? So elections, and also it's your job, and journalists' role, and also administrators need to play a role. Why is it that the administrators only are talking about golden parachuting? Why is it that they're not doing what needs to be done? So I think there's that kind of mindset in Japan. Unless that is corrected, people will not be taking responsibility. Nobody will be sought responsibility, and they just think that as long as they apologize, it's fine. And that's Japan seen by overseas. And there was a person who came to me, he wanted to meet with me. He said that with that kind of accident, and it seems that nothing is happening in Japan. Why is it? So it was a head of state, and he was having difficulty understanding what was happening. And he talked to many Japanese politicians, but he couldn't get an answer. That's why he came to me. So that's how Japan is seen. How well are you aware of that? So I think that's the biggest problem. And we talk about future energy. And from now on, we would need to decentralize as much as possible and move to renewable as much as possible available in the localities. And to promote that, the grid formation is necessary. And we were the ones that created the solar panels during the old crisis. We have a lot of advanced technology, geothermal in Iceland, and many are made in Japan. They are using many made in Japan. Why can't we do it in Japan? So it doesn't reach us, the general populace, you know. And even with Fukushima, everyone has vested rights and interests. But in Japan, we are like sheep, you know, and that's how the world sees us. They think mysterious Japan. So that's how we're seen, and many politicians see as such. And overseas politicians, they think that they know it's not Japan's problem, but they don't know. And what if it occurs? What we need to do? Smart grid and IT technologies are available, and current visualization is now, and there are a lot of applications. And you remember the year 2000 problem? The people talked about the computer crash. That was 14 years ago. Nothing happened, remember? And WWW came in, and because of that, now we have a lot of applications. I think maybe 30 minutes, this is what we do. We touch our mobiles. And we have the iPad, and journalism started to change. So when was it that iPad came in? So I think the fourth year next month. So access counts changed. So you see advancement of technology. With grids, you'll see more and more advancement, and it's necessary to take action before we say things.
Do you have an explanation why Japan is not able to change its electricity market to a new feature?
The power supply structure was created in order for us to be able to fight a war, the Second World War. Now, this was the war which brought about the creation of the power grid system. And I think that can be said for all countries. And so this was a full-out war. And in order for them to be able to engage in such a major-scale war, they needed power. And so in all of the European countries, I can say that most of that became a state enterprise. But in case of Japan, this remained a private sector industry. Now, European countries, the railroads and the airlines have become all nationalized. However, in case of Japan, with the exception of the railroad, they were all still private, but they were regulated and controlled. The same thing applied to the power utilities as well. So during the war, there were control over the power utilities during the war, and that remained. And so, if you ask me why that remained that way, I can't explain that. But during the rapid economic growth ages, where there was much emphasis on heavy industries, they needed the infrastructure, and then they needed to be able to get the supply at the lowest possible cost, and that's how the power grid or the power utilities developed. And so, why was it that they were not able to pass this on to the other industries? And so, it's very difficult to explain this. Mr. Saro, who received the Nobel Economy Prize, and he has mentioned that there's a warning in his book. This is a warning to the Japanese people, and because the Japanese continue to use the same rules, and unless only the winners by the previous rules that are the first to realize that there have been changes in the rules. And so in the post-war period, we were the winners in this industry. And when the times changed, when we no longer were in this rapid progress state, they did not change the rules. They just went by the same rules all the time. And so I think that means that we haven't really learned anything. What are the academics doing? Because they are not maintaining their independence, or they're not teaching their students this. Now, people still tend to think that the University of Tokyo is at the top of the academia. And so I think that it is the fault of the director of the University of Tokyo. Well, if you look at the currency system, at the time of the heavy industries, we had the fixed currency exchange rate. So we try to drive down the cost of the labor cost, and so that we would have a better competitiveness. And so why is it that we were able to grow with that lower pay rate? That's because we had increase in the export that turned to growth in the profits because of the greater export volume, which was then put into capital investment. And so there was additional production upon which we were able to raise the level of the wages. That continued. However, when the currency exchange system had gone to the new system whereby there was no longer fixed, we saw that the yen had gained its value. However, we were not able to bring about any changes to go along with that. And it was not just the fault of the academia, but nobody was able to do that. Well, you have to understand that the elites, they were all graduates of the University of Tokyo. And so this is a kind of a religion for those graduates of the University of Tokyo. And so I said that Japanese universities are just an organization that belongs to the Ministry of Education. Nobody disputes that, or nobody is able to express any conflict on that, because you have to be responsible and what we need to do is to consider ourselves, to look at ourselves in the background within the main pictures.
It's not good enough.
No, what I'm saying is everybody has a certain position or role in the society. And you have to exercise your responsibility. If you cannot do that, you are accountable for the matter in your position. If you go up more authority, more power, you have more responsibility to execute your assignment, your responsibility. That's the meaning of accountability. It's not 説明責任.
いいですか?
if I may just add something, we were talking about accountability in the last judgment. That will be determined as a result of the last judgment. But we have to be responsible for the history of what's happened in history. You can't say you can say that I was against the war, but the war took place. I had no power over that, and you keep saying, "Well, I had no role in that. It wasn't my fault." But if you continue doing that, then there's no future for you. And so you could say that, or you can't simply take responsibility in a moral manner. But so what means that if you learn something, or why I knew the faults of the nuclear power plants, but I was not able to stop those risks, and I think that is my responsibility that I had not fulfilled. So I think that is a responsibility that's shared by all. Well, I think you tend to think that, but if you look at the global governances, we cannot go just by the sense of values among the Japanese. And the word accountability is an English word, and it's really a problem of how to interpret that in Japanese. And so people who have the responsibility in society and the government, what are their responsibilities? And so it looks like the TV specials that they tend to have about the Second World War in August every year. People say, "Oh, I knew what was wrong. I knew this was all wrong, but I wasn't able to say that." And I think we're trying to do the same thing also with Fukushima. So we need to we need to say that the global view of the Japanese government still remains to be mysterious.
I think I return to your early film in the beginning, where you showed how TEPCO knew of the risks but didn't do anything. And the government and the authorities. And I think there might be an important distinction between people who make mistakes because they did not know and people who do not act when they do understand what ought to be done. And that might be one of the things where Japan is a little different from the rest of the world. That in other places, if you have the opportunity to act and you don't act, you are in trouble. In Japan, the important thing seems to be not to do something that is wrong, but not doing anything is considered to be okay, and you can always bow and excuse yourself afterwards. Is that correct?
Yeah, so
yes, we knew they didn't do anything. So maybe they were thinking about what to do about it. And also, what's...
If you're top, 社長、分かってんだけど、どう...
So if you're the top, the CEO, you know...
Book from Harvard Business School. This is a great book. I think I recommend you to read. It's Defining Moment. Subtitle is When the Manager had to make a decision, choose from right to right. どっちも正しいんですよ。だけどどっちを選ぶかという
So the decision has to be made by this manager, and the higher up the hierarchy you are, it will decide your life, the value of your life. And if you make the right decision, then you will leave a legacy, a positive legacy. So there are so many decisions that you could take. So if you take a decision as a CEO, as a minister, as a vice minister, or a bureaucrat, or to the decision as a professor at Tokyo University, then that will give birth to a legacy.
You have to think.
Thank you. I think it's very nice when you're a respectably old professor that you actually learn something. But I think I have learned something from you today about why Japan is where Japan is.
Right.
And I think the conclusion has significant implications for many in this room, that when you actually know what ought to be done and said, you must do and say what ought to be done and said. So I think this final session might result in significant action.
I don't think it's fair to act as if Japan somehow is extra special in that sense of abrogating responsibility. I had long arguments in Canada over forestry, and I remember the CEO of a company, and we were fighting face to face, and he said, "Listen, Suzuki, if you don't like the way we log these forests, everything I do is within the letter of the law. I am not a bandit. My job is to maximize profit for my shareholders, and I'm good at it. If you don't like the way I do it, that's a political argument." And that's the problem, is that when profit becomes the driving force, the corporate agenda is maximize profit. All kinds of shortcuts are taken, and it's not just a Japanese phenomenon.
But there's a difference.
What you have to say is, because with this interconnected, hyper-crowded world and global world, corporate has to be responsible. The corporate is not just maximizing for shareholders. Your company is viewed by the stakeholder of the world. That's what it is. And that is the reason they do have corporate.
Well, I mean, in
so
principle.
that is a long time ago.
In principle, but yeah,
it's a bad
not
company.
that way now.
Right.
And this man who said to me, "I am good at maximizing profit," as soon as he retired, he became a major donor to my foundation.
I know.
Because it was guilt money then, he knew. Right.
You're right. All right.
Let's hope that the people in this room are going to be always slightly better than David Suzuki's forestry enemy and almost as good as Professor Kurokawa's ideal citizen, and that the result of this day will be some people speaking out, knowing more and acting more. And with this, I will hand over the floor to my Deputy Chairman of Japan Renewable Energy Foundation, Soyushi-san.
Thank you very much to the speakers, as well as to Mr. Kabaje, the Executive Board Chair of JREF. Then, without further ado, I'd like to ask Mr. Tsuyoshi, Vice Executive Board Chair, Japan Renewable Energy Foundation, to provide us with the closing remarks to the Revision 2014 Global Energy Turnarounds in Japan Plan. Thank you very much for spending a full day with us, and we were able to hear a heated discussion amongst the four academics, and I was not a very good student at that particular university, but I am forced to come up to the stage to make comments. And first and foremost, I have to express my gratitude to all of you for participating since 9:30 this morning. And so many of you, stakeholders, people engaged in renewables, have come together. And so many experts and speakers have come from overseas, particularly, specifically for this international conference. And for myself, and for all of you participating, I'm sure we were able to learn so much. And also we were able to confirm our understanding as well. And for myself, if I may mention a couple of things. First, the reality of the current situation around the world was mentioned by Eric Martineau. For the end of 2012, the installed capacity was 480 gigawatts. So as far as I know, this is twice the amount of generating capacity of Japan. There is so much RE installed capacity around the world, or from China. So 30% of the new installations is RE. And also 20% of the electricity generated is based upon RE. So from Germany, by 2020, So it's there is now 13 nuclear power plant equivalent of RE, and so there's 9 nuclear power plants left in Germany. So 13 nuclear power plant equivalent of RE is a very large number. So this is not, RE is not a far-off dream, but it's a reality of today and tomorrow. And RE is not a weakling amongst the resources available. So it's a very strong force. And the second point is that there are so many ambitious numerical targets around the world. By 2050, Europe will increase the RE to 80%, or Denmark is saying that it will rise to 100% by 2050, and even Saudi Arabia, by 2030, so it will raise the RE to 20% or 30%. And so if we think through this, Japan's numerical target should be raised, and we should attain a best mix for Japan, and we should come up with clear-cut numerical targets for our country, and provide this country with transparent targets. The future to be is not something that we want, but rather I think the future, I think the numerical targets should be clearly set out. And I think we have to have determination to attain those numerical targets. And next, maybe we don't fully know what is happening around the world. So there is, a flood of information coming in. We are inundated with information, but perhaps the information that we really need is not really available to us. Professor Bradford was saying about the nuclear power plants in the United States, and I learned so much from Peter's presentation. And in the presentation, I was surprised that to protect nuclear power plants does entail a very great opportunity cost, social cost, because it will prevent the commitment to new energy efficiency or renewables. So there is the divide between Japan and the rest of the world, not just today, but in the future. That divide, that difference might become even wider. As Thomas mentioned at the outset, so RE, the quantity of RE has expanded, and that is driving down the price and the cost of RE. And despite that, why isn't Japan joining the bandwagon, jumping onto this RE bandwagon? So, I'm surprised with that. But we have to jump onto that bandwagon, I believe. And versus that, I hope that you will agree. Or Eric Martineau also mentioned.
世界の大きな流れ変化から大きく立ち遅れているのが日本じゃ。
So Japan is behind the curve was something that Eric mentioned. And also concerning energy policy, so what sort of energy policies are required and how should those policies be executed? So, and Ms. Jen Dunn was saying that in the 5-year economic program, so of course there's a top-down command in China, but of course Rainer was saying that in Japan there's lack of policy decisions in this country. So there is no policy decisions being made. Or rather, Klaus was saying that if you look at Japan 40 years ago, it was able to overcome the oil crises. But however, this time, the Japanese cannot overcome the crisis this time because of the vested interest. So if we think through about RE, it's not just a question of energy, but it's about society, economy, and the various systems that make up the whole of our lifestyle. So this issue should not be just left to the economists. We ourselves, as consumers and users, have to take in charge. So consumers have to be involved in solving this problem of energy. So this is not something that should be left to other people. It's you that has to take the decision. I mean, you cannot live without energy. So how do we enhance the energy literacy of the Japanese people? So I think Michael or Photon was saying the game plan has changed. So perhaps Japan is playing the wrong game. And as JREF, the Japan Renewable Energy Foundation, 2.5 years have elapsed since the startup of the foundation, and we've held about 4 international conferences. I think the next target or objective that we have is, in one word, the promote the energy shift of Japan, promote RE, and also to bring in energy democracy to Japan. So when we want to have a fair forum in which to discuss about energy. So I believe that such a forum is essential. So the foundation itself has to have experts, expertise, and people with knowledge. And we want to we want to write up a universal recommendation. So we want to put the RE movement in Japan on the right track. And for that purpose, we would like to communicate, transmit the information that you require. And so, as you have supported us in the past, I do hope that we can continue to provide support to you, and that you will access the foundation. And in order to attain accountability, I do hope that you will support us in our activities. There is one point that concerns me. That is to say, the transmission of information. So sometimes it's called the problem of misinformation. I mean, that's erroneous information. Disinformation is another vocabulary in the English language, but disinformation is intentionally providing information which is not right. So in order to lead the argument in the wrong direction, so therefore the information at first sight looks correct, but it is information that has evil intent in a way. So as JREF, of course, we don't want to provide misinformation, but what we have to prevent is disinformation. So concerning the information from JREF must be the good information that provides you with the correct ideas about what the reality is. That is the belief that we have within JREF. And lastly, 1 month from now, the IPCC will be held in Yokohama, and there will be the international conference related to that. So they'll be talking about the impact of climate change and the vulnerabilities. And last September, in the working group number 1, and in the scientific findings, so, of course, the cause of climate change and warming is the activities of mankind, and the activities of mankind is causing all of these disasters. And then I think the IPCC utilized the word extremely likely that human beings caused this global warming and climate change. And so what sort of change in behavior is required for people? So from that point of view as well, we will continue our activities at the foundation. So on your part, I do hope that you will continue to support us, and we'll be very happy that if we can continue this conversation in the future as well. Thank you very much.
それからすいません。
Oh, lastly, sorry. There will be a photo session. All of the speakers, could you come up to the stage for a souvenir photograph? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
.これでフォトセッションを終了いたします。ご登壇いただきました皆様ありがとうございました。どうぞ皆様大きな拍手でお送りください。ありがとうございました。報道関係者の方は本日のシンポジウムの用紙をお渡しいたしますので、お帰りの際に報道受付にてお受け取りください。なお、こちらの用紙は後日自然エネルギー財団ウェブサイトに掲載いたします。本日お忙しい中、長時間にわたりお付き合いいただきまして誠にありがとうございました。以上をもちまして本日のすべてのプログラムを終了させていただきます。最後までご参加いただき誠にありがとうございました。なお、本日の発表資料につきましては後日財団のホームページに掲載いたします。またご記入いただきましたアンケート用紙はお帰りの際に出口におりますスタッフにお渡しください。お使いになりました同時通訳レシーバーは会場出入り口にて回収いたします。会場外へ持ち出されませんようお願いいたします。お手回り品、お忘れ物などございませんようどうぞ気をつけてお帰りくださいませ。本日はお忙しい中ご来場いただきまして誠にありがとうございました。